Colouring your paper flowers makes an incredible difference to how realistic they look, and personally I think just a little bit of detail in the leaves has the most impact. If you haven't already seen the full Coral Charm Peony tutorial, make sure to check that out for the step-by-step process how to make the flower itself. And I also have separate videos for colouring both the centres and the petals, which I will link in the description box below. For this step, we're going to use both acrylic paints and alcohol markers to colour the leaves. So if you've already coloured your centres and petals, we'll use the same materials here. The acrylic paints that we need are white, yellow and green. If you don't have a pre-mixed green, you can make your own using blue and yellow. And for the alcohol markers, a light beige brown, a darker brown and a dark red. You'll also need an artist paintbrush, a jar or a cup of water, and something to protect your workspace. I'm just using printer paper. And then either a paint palette or a plate. Starting with the sepals, we're going to add a little bit of detail to the edges using the alcohol markers. The process is almost the same for all three shapes, A, B and C. Starting with the lightest beige colour, use the fine end of your marker. We're going to very lightly brush the edge of the paper along that top half of the sepal on the curved edge. You can also add a little bit more on the top edge and less on the sides. Keep your brush strokes light. You'll notice that the ink starts to bleed along the paper, which will create much more of a natural look rather than a harsh line. As the ink bleeds, you can always go back in and add more if you need to. You'll see that sepal A has this pointed detail at the top. Make sure to colour that in too as you work. Next, take the other brown marker and repeat the process. This time we're looking to add less ink, so try to keep this right on the very edge of the paper. Then again for the red, we're going to repeat the same process, but with only very small details. We want a very tiny amount of red for sepal A. Then repeat the steps for the other two sepal A's. Don't worry about making them match, they'll look more realistic if they're slightly different. Then we're going to repeat this for sepal B. Again, keep the ink to the top half, light on the sides and then slightly more on the top edge of the heart shape. Keep the red just to the very tips of the heart. Sepal C is the same again, just add a little more ink in the beige and brown towards the top point of the sepal and then only a very tiny amount of red. Next, we're going to colour leaves H and G. For these, just use the beige and brush the edge of the top 2/3 of the leaf. Add a little more to the point at the top. You can then add small sections with a little more ink, again in the beige. Do this by just leaving the marker on the paper for a few seconds. The ink will start to bleed on its own. It's important to keep the position of these quite random though. Make sure you're not adding these sections in the same place on each leaf. You can also add very small amounts of the brown into these bits. Try to keep them in the middle of the beige ink though, rather than at the edge of the section. You can then turn the leaf over and repeat. You'll probably find that some of the ink has bled through a little bit, so if it has, you might only need to do that a little bit on the back. I also like to add very small hints of red to one or two of the leaves. Again though, we want it to be random, so don't do it to all of them. Then we're going to do a very similar approach for all of our other leaves. So that's leaves D, E and F. However, instead of just brushing the edge of the paper, we're going to work in patches for this. So it's going to look more like a small part of the leaf has more of a blemish or an imperfection. You can do some patches with just a tiny detail on the edge and others with bigger patches of ink. A few patches with small edges that ramp up and down will look good here too, almost like a flattened triangle on the side. The key is to let the ink bleed do the work though. So continue to add your ink right at the edge of the paper and then let it spread naturally. The longer that you hold the marker on the paper, the more it will spread. So if you want a larger patch, hold the marker there or even move further into the paper. It also works really well if you do a few random strokes following the grain lines of the paper too. Go back in with the brown marker again, but not the red for these ones. Then finally add a few strokes down the centre of the leaf, right on the line of the wire, but only for a few of the leaves. Again, we're going to repeat the steps on the back of the leaf. Because of where the paper overlaps to hold the wire in the centre of the leaf, there might be a section that hasn't bled through in the right place and it will probably be a bit off centre and look a bit strange. So if it is, just make that larger so that it then sits on the centre line. So here you can see the difference in the two leaves, the first with no colouring and the second with the marker details. And you can see that by adding just a few details with the markers has made an incredible difference to the whole leaf overall. The final step is to add a line of acrylic paint along the centre line of the leaf. This is going to act like our main vein. You only need a very small amount of paint for this, so just add small blobs of white, yellow and green to your palette. If you don't have green, then just use yellow first and add a tiny amount of blue. We're looking to create a pale olive green here, so mix small amounts of white and green to get to the tone, and then add in tiny bits of yellow as you need to change the colour to more of an olive green rather than a mint green. Add water to your paint to make it thinner, then wipe off any excess paint onto your palette. You can then twist and roll the brush slightly against the palette to create a fine point to your brush. Starting at the bottom of the leaf, very, very lightly stroke upwards along the wire in the centre. You can always practice this on some scrap crepe if you need to first. You want to keep your brush strokes really light, barely touching the paper. Work in very small brush strokes and try to only use the very tip of the brush. You will need to reapply the paint quite a lot, but just take a tiny amount at a time. So that's going to make sure you're not putting too much paint onto the paper at any point. If you did add too much paint, it's going to be harder to get a thin line. As you work up the leaf, just try to use the line of the wire as a guide. If you can, make the line very slightly thicker at the bottom of the leaf, going to thinner at the top. And make sure to leave a little gap at the top of the leaf. Don't take it right to the edge. We're also going to add a line to the centre of leaf H. Obviously there's no wire line to follow here, so just try to stick as closely to the centre as possible. And there we go. I hope you've enjoyed the process of colouring your leaves. If you have, please give this video a like. I'd love to know if you give this a try. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to check out the main Paper Peony tutorial too, and grab the template from my website, tarmochlypaperblooms.com. Until next time, happy flower making.